Hello and welcome to episode 5 of my Kerbal Career. As you can see, I normally don't start out here in the start menu, but I wanted to show something. And that would be these creatures here. These things that look kind of like Kerbals, but don't need oxygen. I'm not sure how they got here exactly, but they are indeed here and they're roaming around. And as you can see, there's even one really close, kind of looking at the camera. But I'm not sure what these are, or exactly how they got here. Anyhow, let us start up our career save. What I've got on the launchpad today are the beginnings of my space station. Now this is just a hub part with several docking nodes to start connecting stuff together. But let's turn SAS on and start launching it. Now, this solid rocket fuel booster, or advanced segmented solid booster, it normally has a lot more thrust than what you're seeing now, but due to just the way it was working, I needed to reduce the thrust to about, I think it's around 65%, so that it would burn longer. And also because of the way that this entire vessel is set up, that I just need to pretty much burn straight up until the solid rocket fuel booster runs out, in which case I can actually use my orbital Bertha, my liquid engine with its own fuel tank. And of course inside this fairing is the actual hub, and as you can see there are a couple of docking ports actually sticking out. You can probably see this side better because there's more light. But these docking ports, they are not attached to the fairing or anything in the fairing. It's actually all movable parts with infernal robotics, and we'll see it unfold when we get the fairing off. Moving things along, we have just a simple climb out of the atmosphere, and once the SRB runs out of fuel, just kind of looking at the scenery there, once the SRB runs out of fuel, we stage into our liquid fuel booster and lose control entirely. Now, even though my vessel is spinning out, there's not really any reason to worry since my apoapsis is still more than a minute away. I can easily solve this. The only real worry that you would have if your vessel starts spinning and your apoapsis is over a minute away is more that your vessel is going to rip itself apart. But since mine hasn't ripped the top half off of the actual engine, then I'm not really worried about anything going wrong, because I have some advanced SAS inside the fairing, so I can just do a couple of spins and eventually regain control, which is pretty much just what you saw me doing. And then of course, since my apoapsis is high enough up, we can just start burning exactly perpendicular to the surface of the planet, so that our orbital velocity goes up enough that we can actually make an orbit. And with over 3000 delta V, that should not be a problem. Now at about this point I can probably get rid of this fairing, so I'm going to shut the engine off just for a second to stage this out. That way none of the pieces rip apart my vessel. Also, since we've managed to get out of the atmosphere, I don't have to worry about aerodynamics anymore. Now, since the sun is on the wrong side of which way we're facing, I'm going to turn that up so we can look at this. Now, basically the design I had for this was I just want it to be a hub, something with some command, a little bit of power. That way I can install a power module later for something with interstellar, probably to do with nuclear fuel, or the larger solar arrays that fold out. And I also have these batteries here, as you can see, so I get plenty of electric charge. And aside from that, it's just a couple of longer arms with docking ports and shorter arms with docking ports. Both I have planned for their own kind of utility. Now, the actual robotic parts that we have here are these two arms, these hinges, and I've just set their max rotate to be just above 90. That way they don't go too far out of being straight. Now, for whatever reason, the installment of Infernal Robotics that I have has it set so that these go in basically 0.5 increments, so I can't actually get it to be perfectly 90, unfortunately. Now, of course, we just have a bulkhead right there that was holding the fairing together. And we do have a decent-sized RCS tank with a few thrusters just for minute movements. It's not really meant for docking with other things, but I didn't want to have this thing be completely free-floating. I wanted to have a little bit of mobility with it. And I figured a single monopropellant tank on the back should suffice. And the reason I put it on the back and not in the center is because when these arms fold down, the center of mass is actually going to switch to be about here, in pretty much the center, versus where the center of mass is about on that part currently, with the arms folded up. So I am pretty much in the orbit I want. Now I want this station to be a 100-kilometer orbit, so let me just speed up until I am at my apoapsis, which is a few minutes away, and then of course I'll raise my periapsis. So as you can see, we are approaching, a few seconds off, and I do have that advanced SAS right there, the reaction wheels. And we're just a little past our apoapsis, so we will start burning. 103, 101, that is a decent orbit. Now, as you can see, I have parachutes on this, but we're in orbit, so how exactly do I plan to return that and actually get funds for it? Well, I'm actually going to be testing something with this part. Now, as you know, stage recovery will recover vessels that have reduced their speed to a certain amount. As you can see, the previous stages I had were apparently destroyed. Let's see. Oh, those were the nose cones, so there's no point in needing those. No, those were just the fairing pieces. Now, this one was recovered. This was the bottom piece that I had with the solid rocket booster that I used to launch this. Now, while we're looking at this, I just want to make a mention. I did do a launch before this, and it was just another one of those contract launches, and I just basically went into orbit around Kerbin and then descended. I've already shown 2 or 3 of them, so I didn't feel it necessary to show another one, and I don't feel it necessary to exactly show them in the future, but I will confirm that I've done them with these pages. Now, I will show them under a couple of different circumstances, such as if something goes wrong and a Kerbal dies or a vessel breaks, then I'll show that, but if everything goes the way I plan it, then it's just not really that interesting. And I didn't feel this last one was all that interesting, aside from the fact I got a huge amount of money from a couple of the contracts. So as you can see, I used an ion engine, which was just simple use it in orbit. The next one was use the Poodle engine in a suborbital trajectory, collect science from space around Kerbin, and of course use a decoupler in a suborbital trajectory. Not really all that interesting. Now, oh, and apparently there was a 5th one, which is just test a bulkhead while landed. Again. Test small gear bay. So there was a lot of contracts in that launch. Apparently I forgot about a couple of them because I did them all landed and I just didn't think of them past actual takeoff. And of course this was just the warning that I completed my vessel. Now these stages that you see were destroyed. They're not always accurate because sometimes during simulations what will happen is it'll tell you stage is destroyed just because of the way the mod works. And even if they don't get destroyed, I still sometimes find myself getting these messages, and I don't know if that's a bug or not. As you can see, this entire vessel, this stage with the strut connector and this radial booster, which we just saw the exact same variant of, was destroyed twice, but I only launched the vessel once. So that's just, and there's 3 times that this stage was destroyed. Again, only 1 launch. And that's just because of the fact that simulations will sometimes show it. But since I didn't see any recovered for that stage, apparently I didn't recover it. And that's all of those. But anyhow, this is an orbital berth engine. We have nothing there, which means I need to see if I can recover this by just doing this. And I'm going to stage with these 4 SRBs and go. Now, it's easy to say that this now has a suborbital trajectory, or should. Yes, it does. So since this has a suborbital trajectory and enough parachutes to make it going slower than it needs to, I should recover it. And that's kind of the entire theory. If I can recover that part without actually having to follow it down by just kind of shooting it into orbit, or shooting it off into the atmosphere, then I can basically just get vessels from the moon, which have Kethane, and just fire them off until they get into, like, I don't know, 25,000 meters of the Kerbin surface. That way they will just be recovered by stage recovery, and I don't have to follow them all the way down. So, yes, I've been ranting on for quite a bit, but I just kind of want to tell you about what's going on. So let's actually unfold this so you guys can see it unfolded. Now I'm going to face it toward us, and start going. I know it's not really all that exciting, but there we have it. This is our station hub. Of course, we've got the little bit of RCS for minor movements if we need them, but I'm fine with the position I'm in. So, also have plenty of power. We have a couple of these satellites, which I just kind of added these for aesthetics, really, because I could. I mean, why not? And this is a simple station hub, which we will soon be docking things together to make it much more complete. And the reason I did want this nice flat tank here is because of the grappling hook. Not sure the actual name, the arm extender thing. Basically, I can just hook anything into here temporarily just to dock it, and then of course unhook it. So that's kind of why I wanted a flat base versus just leaving it as the strut, or not the strut, as the structural part here. So we have our first piece of our station, and of course it's the core hub. Now, we do need a name for it. Now, I've just called this Space Station Hub for now, but of course we can rename this, or Kerbin Station Hub. And if you have any neat names that you want to name this station for an actual name instead of just leaving it as the Kerbin Station Hub, then let me know in the comments and I will think about adding it if I find that it's also neat. Basically means don't choose any inappropriate names or anything. So simple as that. Back on the launch pad, I have the most insane rocket that I have unlocked, which is this giant liquid fuel booster down here. Now, as for the purpose of this lander up here, it is a lander that is going to Minmus. And of course, we are going to gather science high, low over Minmus, and also in whichever biome we land in. And of course, we are bringing all three of our Grand Kerbals, Bill, Jebediah, and Bob, and they have a huge life support tank right here on top, so they do not need to go hungry. Now this is definitely one of the trickiest vessels I've had to launch, simply because of its sheer size, meaning this thing, the Advanced Liquid Fuel Booster. It's just absolutely massive, and it's definitely going to prove pretty difficult for us to launch with. So, I am not going to go to full throttle, at least not yet. And if you're wondering why I have 8 parachutes on there before we launch, it's because I want to recover this, since it only cost me about, I want to say 56, 57,000 funds, this one piece. So, we're going to hope that these 8 parachutes can recover it. Without any further ado, however, let's launch. Now, I'm not going very fast on purpose, because everything up here likes to break if I go too quickly. Which means we're going to be frequently throttling down. And by everything likes to break, what I'm really talking about are these little fuel tanks here. Because they're actually slightly outside of this command module's aerodynamic field that Ferrum Aerospace calculates. So they actually have to suffer a bit of wind resistance. And if we're accelerating or going too quickly, then they break quite violently. And okay, there's my camera controls back. I lost them for a moment. I got worried for a second that something awful was going to happen. I mean, what could normally go awful with a part this big? With, at roughly a third thrust, has 1200 kilonewtons. Or that oddly bends. Yeah, nothing can go wrong. This should be a piece of cake. Now, while I'm watching myself fly this vessel, something I do want to mention is that in the simulations, all of these vessels work. Now, I can't always say that they're going to work, because if they mess up when I do my official launch, then I always record the actual launch. I usually don't record the simulations, but if something screws up, then I typically would show it. However, I've been quite lucky without getting any odd failures with things, other than that small camera lockup and the UI glitch from last time, which we unfortunately see later. But as you can see, I'm just taking this vessel very easily, and if you're wondering why it's shaking, that's actually me using all of the SAS I have aboard this vessel, trying to turn it. So that shaking is my efforts to get it into a gravity turn. And we stage out of that giant liquid fuel booster in hopes that we will be recovering it. Additionally, I want to make a final comment on what I was saying previously about not showing just the basic contract missions that pretty much keep me bound to Kerbin. Is that if you guys want me to show all of them, then I guess I will, but I just do not feel it is necessary if I'm basically just going to go into the atmosphere with a vessel designed to complete 4 or 5 contracts and then crash it back into Kerbin, all the while I'm just saying, oh look, I'm completing this contract. I honestly don't find it that interesting, and instead of showing that, I'd rather start working on more science gathering from planets we haven't visited, as well as space stations and bases. As you can see, I am working on getting my encounter with Minmus, and because of our launch window, we have a very odd time actually getting this encounter, since we can't just burn straight out. We actually have to deal with the plane change. So I got my encounter with Minmus, and I am just going to take it. It's a rather odd encounter, but I end up getting one, so even if I don't get the burn exact, even though I think I'd have to get the burn exact, because it's a very short window that I'm actually inside. Yeah, roughly an hour that I'll be inside of its sphere of influence, so it's a very easy window to mess up. But if I get headed in the right direction, it'll be easy to fix. So this is going to take almost 1,000 delta V. I have 240 in this stage. And the only reason it's taking 1,000 is because, of course, just the way I'm actually burning. If I were able to actually get on that plane of alignment, like if you look here, the way I've lined them up, that Minmus is above Kerbin over here, and it's below Kerbin over on this side. So if you're actually able to get Minmus roughly there or on the opposite side of this circle, then you can go straight out without having to change your plane, and you can get to Minmus rather easily just by going straight out and encountering it at the peak. And of course that would be your most efficient transfer, because then you don't have to deal with plane change. But since we had a bad timing on our launch, we do have to deal with it. Now, I've completed the burn, but as you can see, I do not have my encounter. Like I said, it's a very easy burn to screw up, however, it's also a very easy one to fix, since right after I start going more toward Minmus, in actuality, such as right about here, then I should be able to edit these maneuver nodes much more safely, such as that very simple correction burn right there. And of course, I can do that burn almost anywhere near that location. However, I do have to get out of this pretty strong arc. Now, I'm not moving because my focus is indeed set on Kerbin. However, I do still get all the information of the craft I am controlling. Odd as that is. So our vessel is approaching its maneuver node, and it's going to be about a minute past it, but it shouldn't affect too much. We just need to burn this direction a little bit. And there we have our encounter with Minmus. Now I got a second message, stage recovered. This was the gigantic liquid fuel booster, which I recovered it for 34,400. Well, I'd say that is successful. Now, what was the second thing? An asteroid was destroyed. Well, thank you, Stage Recovery, for letting me know that. 1 times a potato-like rock. Well, we now know what asteroid's part identity is. A potato-like rock. Since the previous message gave me the names of the parts, we know what the asteroid's names are now, secretly. A potato-like rock. Asteroids are potatoes. This is a fact now. Just like Minmus is a giant scoop of mint ice cream, asteroids are potatoes. And of course, we will do asteroids later on when I get the claw thing, whatever it's called. So, skipping ahead until we are inside of Minmus's sphere of influence, I'm just burning a mix between retrograde, so I slow my vessel down, and in the direction of Minmus itself. That way I start heading toward the planet. And I only have to burn toward Minmus because I'm so far away. And once I hit my periapsis, I just burn into our landing. And of course, it is time to begin the primary reason that we came out here to Minmus, and that is to collect science. Now, we of course have one Science Bay Junior, one Mystery Goo experiment, and all of the EVA reports and crew reports for both high over Minmus, low over Minmus, and on the place that we land. So you can see we just finished collecting all of our science for low over Minmus, and we are beginning our landing descent. This vessel is pretty much capable of landing anywhere, and when I say anywhere, I don't mean on these cliffs. Now, the idea is to land there. However, I'm hoping I can get over the salt flats just because they're so much easier. Now, my intention... Okay, so everything just froze. That was odd, for a second anyway. Even it appears my recording software froze for a moment. And I very well should have taken this as a sign that the recording should start to mess up. Now, I had never had this happen before, and I can't say that this is the same thing as the bug I was talking about earlier. However, it's equally as annoying because it happened mid-recording. Usually the bug I was talking about in the previous episodes happened when I pushed the record button rather than happening in the middle of my gameplay, because that way I can actually tell when it happens versus this, which I was not able to tell until, of course, I'm here reviewing the actual footage. Now you can see we landed on Minmus, so I'm going to skip ahead. So after a very unexpected crash, I have reloaded the game, hopped back out to my Minmus lander, and it appears as though we just touched down, as we can see that this material bay has not yet given up its science. And neither has this mysterious goo. So I'm assuming that once we hit ground and landed, that's when the persistent files saved our game, and anything we've done since then was not saved. So yeah, there was a crash that required me to restart my game, and thus the recording session I had, which means that we finally get to stop having to deal with that awful jumpy recording. Now, I again don't know why my game froze temporarily while of course I was playing it, which in turn I can't exactly say it was the game's fault alone. Well, the game was what crashed, but it ended up freezing my entire computer, so I'm guessing just KSP related stuff. Since then, I've gone about and actually cleared out a bunch of crap from my computer, so it's been running better. As you can see, we took here Bill, and we flew him over to the Minmus slopes so that he can gather a second set of EVA reports and surface samples. And we just fly by, almost hitting the solar panel, but not quite, and bring him back to our lander. And now it is Bob's turn. Now Bob crashed the game last time, but he seems to be alright this time. So we're going to take him up on this mountain because I'm pretty sure the lowlands are down in this direction. So in order to get there in a more efficient time, I just use the EVA propellant to go straight over the mountain. And of course this turns out to be a problem when I actually have to stop, seeing as how Kerbals in their EVA suits can actually get into a Minmus orbit simply because of how much, or how little, thrust and maximum delta V you need to get into a Minmus orbit. But eventually I get Bob here to slam into the ground and not die, which is quite impressive on his part. And, of course, collect the delicious science we want so that we can start researching with it. And although I've used most of my EVA propellant to get him up on this mountain, it should take less getting him back. Now that weird dance thing I did is I was finding out that if you tap on the shift key, the standard up, translate up, with the EVA propellant in the Kerbal suit, the EVA suit, then, and you push W to walk forward, then you'll basically bounce off the surface, and then you will start trying your walk animation, and your guy will just look like he's dancing. So that's what I was just kind of playing with momentarily. And we are running dangerously low on EVA propellant, but we have made it back to our vessels, so it's nothing to worry about. Now if we were still on that mountain with only a fourth of an EVA propellant, guessing they're measured still in liters, then it might be a problem. So we will grab on and board the vessel. There we go. We have 3 different biomes worth of surface samples and EVA reports, as well as 3 different segments of our fuel here. Now, in reality, I probably have enough delta V to get me back if I plan efficiently enough. But I still want to do this the way I was planning on from the start, which is going to be just go down to the edge of this ladder and start collecting science. So of course you can see that I am just floating around all of my Science Bay Juniors and my mysterious goo containers in order to collect the science out of them. That way I can bring back all of the science without having to bring back all the heavy parts as well. Now of course I do have the thermometer, but it's attached to the command pod, which I will be saving, so there's no concern in taking it off. However, this bottom stage will be dropped somewhere. Oh, look, the UI glitch is back. Well, that can't be good. Yeah, that probably means bad things are about to start happening. So, with a quick escape to the Space Center and back, the UI has stopped flickering. I'm glad that one is so easily to solve. Now it is time to take off. So, based on my location, where's Kerbin? Kerbin is that ways. So, I basically want to be heading in this direction, which in other words means that I want to be heading in about a 90-degree orbit, just like how we exit Kerbin, since north is north, and go to the, while looking at the planet, toward the right, as you can see, you just have to face the 90-degree marker. And I'm just going to burn straight down the horizon, because that's going to be the most efficient, since we're utilizing the Oberth effect to its fullest. And in a single burn from landing to Kerbin, I got my Kerbin periapsis to be about 26,000. And that's just because I burned straight out at 90, which turned out to be pretty much the exact reverse direction of where Minmus was going, and back to Kerbin. So we're just going to wait until we are outside of the sphere of influence before we set our alarm, and once we're in the right, then we set the periapsis alarm 1 hour before we hit it. That way we will be prepared for when we get close. So while we're waiting for the Minmus lander to actually come back to Kerbin with its huge quantities of science, we're going to take the science we've gotten from the transmitted crew reports, as well as the completed contracts. And ultimately, I am just going to pick up the engines, the heavy rocketry right there. So this episode has been longer than most, this one being just over 30 minutes, but I did have a lot to talk about, some changes for things I'll be skipping, but I'll still keep you informed. Now, I won't be skipping all of them, as next time we will be starting with one of these contract completing vessels, just because it's the first time we'd be going to the moon to do some contracts, and then we'll also be showing a lander that needs to go to Minmus, except it needs to fire off a very long 2.5-meter solid rocket booster while landed. So, very nice challenges indeed. But this is going to conclude this episode. I did have to show a little bit of footage of that strange glitchiness, but I just wanted to confirm that I made it to Minmus. Anyhow, I thank you all for watching. This has been episode 5, which is where my previous series died, so I figured I would make it a little bit longer anyway, just as a kind of special, along with, of course, those odd things we saw in the beginning. But I thank you again. This is PTTGRW, signing out.